Hey, you guys. Today I'm going to be doing part 4 of Ancient China, Qin Shi Huang. Always have to give credit where credit is due. Ancient History Encyclopedia, Duxters, Britannica.com, Stanford.edu, TED-Ed, Crash Course, Live Science, China.org.cn, National Geographic, specifically an article by John Roach, and the textbook The Global Past, published by Bedford Books. So, if you remember a few videos ago, I showed you a timeline that looks something like this, and I was talking about how I thought the Qin dynasty was pretty cool, but even though it was really short, well, that's the dynasty I'm going to be talking about today, and specifically the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, Qin Shi Huang. Now, up to this point on the timeline, there had only been 3 dynasties: the Xia, the Shang, and the Zhou. And even though there were dynasties, it doesn't mean that China was united. There were actually, by the time the Zhou period was happening, there were 7 states within China, and they were the Chu, the Han, the Qi, the Qin, the Wei, the Yan, and the Zhao. And eventually, the Qin state will take over and become the Qin dynasty and take over the Zhou dynasty, but not before the Warring States period. Now, the Warring States period is a period from 475 to 221 BCE in which all the states were fighting against each other over, periods of time. And they were fighting for dominance, they were fighting for power, they were fighting for land, they were fighting for money, they were fighting for everything that states always fight each other about. Eventually, the state of Qin will prevail and take over. And the king of Qin, a man by the name of Ying Zhang, would crown himself the first emperor of a united China. First time in history that China would be united. Now, his name actually, Shi Huangdi, means first emperor. So what he named himself, Qin Shi Huangdi, or Qin Shi Huang, means the first emperor from the state of Qin. And also, if Qin and China sound a bit familiar, well, that's where it gets its name from. Now, generally, Emperor Qin's dynasty worked to make life better for the Chinese people. And just a couple examples of some things that he accomplished. One of the things he accomplished is that he standardized coins, weights, and measures. He made them the same, coins, weights, and measures across the country. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important. Think of this. Think you're a wheat salesman, okay? And you're coming from one place and selling your bags of wheat somewhere else. And you say this weighs 5 pounds or whatever the standard way to measure was. And somebody else says, well, in my town, we measure things in grams. Well, I don't know how to transfer between pounds and grams, so now we have a problem. But everybody uses pounds, or if everybody uses grams or whatever, then everybody can agree, yes, that weighs 5 pounds. Everybody agrees. And if everybody uses the same money across the country, then buying and selling things is very easy. Could you imagine if every state in the United States had different money? And that actually did happen for a while. It made it very difficult to travel from place to place. Another example of something that he accomplished was that he joined the states together with roads and canals. Now, this is important because it actually makes it easier to travel. It makes it easier to transport things. It makes it easier for armies to go where they need to go. It makes you feel more connected to the state next to you instead of separate. So it made the united China actually united physically. Now, up to about this time, Confucianism was a philosophy that many Chinese followed. Now, Confucianism isn't really a religion, it's a philosophy, it's a way of thinking about things. It is the following of the teachings that the Westerners call a man called Confucius. His actual name is Kung Fu Tzu. Now, the Confucian teachings are based on pretty basic things. Confucianism is based on human-centered, moral-based life. In other words, the humans are what's making life go, so we have to be human-centered. We have to live a good life. We have to be moral. We have to treat each other kindly. We have to have a respect for our elders. We have to have respect for our families. We just have to be good people. And so Confucianism was something that the Chinese people up to this time were following. And the idea of Confucianism living within the Qin dynasty was fine for a while, until the scholars, the Confucianism scholars, people who studied Confucianism and taught it, started criticizing Emperor Qin. Now, Emperor Qin did not like to be criticized. The first thing he did was he took all the books, any book that talked about anything other than him, took them all out, all the books, all the scrolls, and he burned them, and he made it illegal for any family or any place to have any book that wasn't about him. He also buried some Confucian scholars alive. Yes, you heard that right. You can imagine the criticism stopped. Basically, the Qin dynasty was a legalist dynasty. Legalism is a very strict following of the law. Very strict. There is no wiggle room here. There is no circumstance in which you can break the law, period. And if you broke the law, you would be punished very severely, from injury to death and everything before and in between. So, at this point is where I'm going to shift a little bit from the history of ancient China to Emperor Qin Shi Huang himself. Now, as you know, many people become king or queen or emperor, as the case may be. As soon as that happens, they begin to plan for their death, plan for their afterlife. The pharaohs in Egypt did this all the time. As soon as they became pharaoh, they began to build their tombs or build their pyramids. They had to get ready for the afterlife. Well, Qin Shi Huang did the same thing. The thing about building your tomb and making it bigger than the guy before you and making it more opulent and extravagant than the guy before you did a few things. It showed that you had the power to have this done. You had the money to have this done. You had the people who would be willing to work for you to get this done. This was a show of power when a big tomb would be built. Now, Qin's tomb, or mausoleum, and this is what we're going to start calling his burial place, a mausoleum. A mausoleum is a building or a structure that houses tombs. We're going to call it that mausoleum. The mausoleum took 40 years to build, took 700,000 workers to build it. It's really a show of riches and strength, right? And having this done was important to him for a lot of reasons, and not the least of which that he was kind of a paranoid guy. And maybe he had a little right to be paranoid. There were at least 3 assassination attempts on his life that we know of. And he never slept in the same room, or palace for that matter, twice in a row. He took walks. When he took walks, he walked in a courtyard behind walls so no one could see him and no one could see where he was. He always traveled in carriages that were closed so no one could see him. No one could know who was in there, or if it was him, or if it was family, or if it was, some of his assistants, or who was it. And then he did one other thing that was really quite curious. He took mercury every day. Now, the metal mercury, yeah. He was always looking for a magical medicine, a magical elixir that would make him immortal. He was always sending people out to other parts of the world, find the secret of immortal life. There's got to be something. And so he thought mercury, because it was so cool looking, it had to be magic, and he took a little bit every day. The truth of this is that mercury is highly poisonous to humans. you shouldn't even really touch it. So taking it like a vitamin is a really bad idea. Now, it is actually probably what killed him in 210 BCE. And within about 8 years of his death, the Qin dynasty will fall, and it fell to our old friend, Emperor Han. I want to get back to Qin's mausoleum, though. This place was built to mimic the city and the palaces in which he lived in life. It was built underneath a man-made mountain. According to an ancient Chinese historian, it had palaces and pavilions and offices and vessels and precious stones and rarities. It had pearls in the ceiling to look like the stars in the night sky. This place is crazy big. How do we know? Well, we don't. We can only guess and use historical primary sources. Why? Because it's never been excavated. Why? Well, there's a couple of reasons. It's never been excavated because, one, the Chinese government doesn't want to risk destroying it. And if you let archaeologists go in and start digging holes and stuff, which is what archaeologists do, you know, you risk losing some antiquities, some beautiful things, some destroying something that is so incredibly priceless to the Chinese history. So they don't want anybody going in there, really. And the other thing that keeps people out is that soil tests of the area have indicated very high levels of mercury. And that's because another historical text tells us that there are supposed to be rivers of mercury inside the mausoleum that represent the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. And it would just be way too dangerous to go in there, way too dangerous to the people, and way too dangerous to allowing, if that mercury has not seeped down into the water table, then, you know, no one wants to risk that. Here's what some people think it might look like. Now, some parts of the mausoleum complex, this big area, in fact, many parts of the mausoleum complex have been excavated, just not the man-made mountain. Just outside the man-made mountain, archaeologists have found pits full of dancers and acrobats and musicians, all made out of a clay called terracotta. And we'll talk more about that later. Some very famous terracotta figures in the next video.